Go.
Unmute.
Okay.
All right. Hey, okay, I'm gonna start over. Yeah, I won't start over. Reproductive isolation, the idea that species breed kind of within themselves and don't tend to breed outside of their own group. That's kind of a little rule that you learn in kind of a simplistic idea of species, but at least it gives us kind of a benchmark. So remember, Apis cerata, Apis mellifera, multiple comb cavity nesting species, but they're not always in cavities. That was that. So there it is. Okay, we got these species, a bunch of different species. So within, Apis cerana, there are a number of species. Apis koshevnikovi, Apis nuluensis, that all live in Southeast Asia, and they're good species. They don't interbreed with each other, but they're kind of these four species groups. But without the yardstick of reproductive isolation used to define subspecies, to define species, classification of honeybees at the level below that depends on current knowledge of the amount of distribution of genetic variation. That sounds pretty fancy. Subspecies are named on perceived natural groupings within the species based on this variation. You know what that really means? Agreement among observers. If you and I agree that this population is more or less breeding within itself, but it doesn't have the yardstick of reproductive isolation, we might describe it as a subspecies. And one of the most prolific sort of scientists in this area was an Austrian named Friedrich Rüttner. And he was most active. He was the person who developed computer programs to do discriminant analysis to describe subspecies. And in insects in general, since the early 50s, there's been an effort to not use subspecies because we have 1 million named species of insects. Why do we need to divide them more? But within the honeybee, which has this weird range, in its natural range of Europe, Africa, and Asia, there's a huge diversity. And so Rüttner spent decades studying morphologically the variation in these groups and came up with a description of a number of subspecies. I can tell you there are other scientists who came up with many more subspecies, and there are people that are unhappy because their subspecies wasn't recognized. But Rüttner has more or less turned out to be kind of right, based on as we begin to do more molecular things. So this was this book that was pretty important in understanding this. So the reason I bring this up is kind of to talk about this a little bit. So Rüttner actually called them, he knew they were subspecies. He used the word subspecies, but in that book, he used the term geographic races. And that indicates to you where we're coming from. So in other words, most of the subspecies in the honeybee are kind of restricted a bit to certain geographical areas, and those are kind of historical reasons. Now, within a single subspecies, like Apis mellifera, the dark bee of Northern Europe, occurs from France all the way to the Ural Mountains in Russia, the old Russia, not the one that's Ukraine, and also in Scandinavia and England and Ireland. That's all within this subspecies, Apis mellifera. The other thing is you get a third name when you're a subspecies. But there are these other bees, the Swiss brown bee, the Leyland bee, the heather bee of Scandinavia, and these are what we now call ecotypes. All the subspecies will interbreed. So you see, that's why we've got to agree that something is a subspecies, because this bee will interbreed with bees from South Africa, even though they're thousands of miles apart and never in nature would ever come together. But they don't have that yardstick of reproductive isolation. Okay, there it is. So now you kind of know this stuff. This is that distribution. It's actually, I think somewhere I have a cruder picture, but we now know that the range of Apis mellifera occurs kind of over here into China too. Just a quick explanation, many of you have seen this kind of slide before. 18,000 years ago, Europe was covered with, a lot of it was covered with glaciers. And the honeybees, you know, that was there were pushed down into kind of a little refugia for a few thousand years, thousands of years. And they accumulated genetic differences. And then the glaciers retreated. And we have what we now call subspecies. So the Italian honeybees, you were kind of hemmed in by the Alps. There's so few glaciers here, you know, they hadn't yet. This is, and here's mellifera from refuges down probably in France. It's spread throughout Northern Europe. Here's Carnica, also kind of from the Alps. And to make a long story short, there's a lot of subspecies. There are now 28 recognized subspecies. That glacier story works great for Europe. It doesn't work for Africa. There are kind of other explanations that we can talk about, but we're talking about this subspecies here, Apis mellifera caucasica. So, little background. Of course, honeybees aren't native to the New World. We brought a bunch of these subspecies in. The interesting story on its own. Caucasica, this one that we're going to talk about, was brought in the 1880s. In fact, let's see, I don't know if this is on a slide coming up, but there were a couple of Canadians. Hall was one in 1880 and 1882. They brought them into Canada. And then US beekeepers got them from Canada. And by, I think, 1903 or 1905, the Rauchfus brothers of Denver, Colorado brought bees directly into the US from Europe. Okay, so then they had these bees. Okay, hold that thought for a minute. WSU, you know, we've been interested for a long time to try to develop bees that were, you know, adapted for Pacific Northwest conditions. And this started back in the late 90s, and we began breeding from stocks that we could get from, you know, from the US, because of course you can't bring bees in from these other countries, right? This guy Doolittle came up with, you know, from a bunch of dreams, came up with the idea that you could do exactly what the Heikums and John Jacob are doing and graft. So even though, you know, it's all modern, we have diesel trucks, this guy kind of came up with the idea of grafting into an empty cell and putting it in a queenless colony or a queen-right colony and making queen cells. I went through that quickly because I don't want you to compare this to the ones John showed. Anyway, so the sort of question is, well, what kind of bees do you want? You know, we select for various traits. And for us here in the Pacific Northwest, one of the ideas was, you know, had to do with this overwintering behavior. This is all in this this book by Laidlaw, Page and Laidlaw, you know, just traits that you can select for. Of course, we have the ability to instrumentally inseminate queens. And, you know, we weren't doing much of this really related to our breeding within the stocks that we had here in the US. But Sue Covey had been doing this for quite a while. Almost everyone I know that instrumentally inseminates queens learned from Sue. And she joined our lab, and we got a permit to bring in semen for breeding. For those of you that are old enough to remember, this kind of follows the USDA APHIS's freeing up of the ability to bring in bees from Australia and New Zealand back when they thought there wouldn't be enough bees for almonds. And using that as an argument, we convinced them to give us a permit to bring in semen in their jurisdiction. So one of the obvious things for us to bring in related to being adapted to cold climates was this subspecies, mainly from, well, it's from the Caucasus Mountains. And it's the country where you can get it from. You can get it from Russia, and you get it from Georgia, and you can get it from some parts of the Caucasus Mountains actually go into northern Turkey. Yeah, so that was something we were interested in getting. Some of the traits of these, I won't go too much into them. One of them was propolis collection. They're big, they collect a lot of propolis. They shut down their colonies in the fall. They'll oftentimes close up entrances pretty well. And this was one of the reasons they were not favored by beekeepers, you know, prior to a bunch of the work that Marla Spivak did to show that propolis is kind of beneficial for the bees themselves. Yeah, the other things they were known for, if you read the old literature, you know, was a very white combs. You know, back in the day when people really cared about making comb honey, they were known for making white cappings and also being gentle. So let's see, I don't know why I have that slide there. Basically, this is an area, part of that 2008 permit was convincing the USDA that we were in a island in a sea of wheat, because they, at the very end, when we had gone through a bunch of negotiations for about a year and a half with them, they said, okay, you can do it, but you got to do it on an island. And you know, if you know where Pullman, Washington is, it's 100 miles further east from here, and we're still not near the ocean where I can get into the island. So in a very probably ill-advised response, without taking the time to count to 100, I wrote back, and I did use the term we're an island in a sea of wheat, and they agreed, and they let us bring it. And they gave us the permit. Okay. Okay, oops. Over here on the computer, it's just saying connecting. The rest of the talk was really great.
Oh, maybe it seems like it lost internet for a second. I just. Yes. So it's the most people that have ever used this Wi-Fi, so.
Yes. Well, I need to start talking. I don't know about the.
Yeah, you're great at that.
Yeah. So do you think it'll just come on by itself?
It looks like it's trying to, so.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So in about 2000, oh man, it was 2010, I think was the first year. Through a bit of good fortune. Actually, a little bit before that, I already had seen this bee in Turkey and worked with it some, but we didn't have we did have the permit, but Turkey would not allow us to bring semen out of Turkey. And this is an interesting story because we were initially working with a Turkish colleague of mine, and we were writing a grant, and we were going to do all this work. And it was a little internal strife within the academic world of Turkey, to where went there, got a lot of material, and then kind of in the last minute, 2 or 3 days before going to the airport to come back, they said, no, that's not a good idea. You can't do it. Because they were afraid, and this will make the Heikums and John laugh, that we were going to bring it back and make so much money, and they wouldn't get any of that money in Turkey because we were taking their precious resources. And it now says an unknown error occurred. Join from browser or close. I'm going to pick join from browser.
We broke it, Steve. We're doing so well.
Okay. Well, I think other folks can still hear me. So
yeah.
Yeah. So
differences in management to be in behavior, you know, substantial.
That's very interesting though, because that would suggest that during mating, they tend to mate with their own. Because if you have, right, I mean, if you have a drone congregation here, wouldn't you think the drones from Italians and Carniolans would intermix and then mate with any queen that came?
Well, where I read these at is a little different. I mean, I'm in Southern Oregon, where and we're pretty isolated, and I think we're able to.
There's also some evidence that Carniolans and Italians and DCAs made at different levels. The sort of
Altitude, you
made
mean?
at different- Yes, different altitudes.
And don't the queen, like Russell says, he favors the dark queens. So queen producers would kind of favor that strain that they're interested in. Rather than.
It
have
depends,
a-
you know, like you saying the package to you guys, they love Italians because they produce more pounds of bees in the season, but you know, price of feed, you know, there's that extra 2 pounds of bees and that's not good. Your feed bill.
Pat?
Here's I want to make an overall statement, but here's an actual, something that we see when we catch queens. If weather's a little bit harsher, a little bit cool, you got half the yard Italian and half the yard Carniolan or Caucasian. The dark bees always make in cool weather. You get a much better percentage on Carniolan. It's just a fact.
So they're self-selecting is what you're saying, like.
Well, I don't know
you
about
notice
that. I attribute it to they'll mate in cooler weather.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds stupid, but could it be the fact that they're darker and they absorb more heat, they're willing to fly? I don't know, but I'm just saying it's a fact. But so I want to talk about something overarching. That there's been a confluence here at this university. Okay. So Eric Olson played a part in all this. Steve, you played a part in this. Sue Colby played a part in this. Brandon played a part in this. And so there was this confluence that happened here that I don't think has happened anywhere for a long, long time. And I think, I don't want to go to your heads. But I think your management somehow resulted in something that the whole industry is. So I think you deserve a round of applause.
Awesome. Wow.
I think that's a perfect place to end.
Okay. Hey, let me go through these picture slides
Okay, go
just
quick.
quickly. Okay. Yeah, so there. Oh,
Sorry, the pointer's not gonna work.
okay,
We're
we're way past that. Okay. So anyway, this is Caucasian South Ossetia, Tbilisi. This is our main collecting place I really like most. Right here next to the highest mountain in Europe, right there. Mestia, and then Pasanuri is another place. Okay. Sure, we collected a bunch. Yep, COVID delayed, right? Okay. This is where we go. This is Mestia up here, and you should look up this place sometime if you want, like on I don't know, Wikipedia or how do you? Oh no, it's not moving.
Which way do you want?
I want to go
Forward?
Yes.
I think you might just have to like scroll, just click on it like this with the mouse.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because
Hmm.
the full screen wasn't working either.
Oh wow, I see. Okay.
There you go.
This is the road to it. It's about 4 or 5 hours on the dirt road. Okay, more of that. Okay, there's the road. That's the, oh, goodness. Yeah. That's the place. These towers are super interesting. They're these medieval towers. This place is a little bit like Switzerland. It was never conquered. They would just, I think, hide up there and shoot at people with arrows that came and tried to. It's really hard to get there, and I don't think you'd hang out there a long time trying to burn them out or anything. So there's still a few hundred of those things left. It's pretty interesting. Okay, gotta go down. Okay, that's the view from, there's a couple in town. That's the view from the hotel room, actually. That's the road to it. Sue has some stories there that she's lying. And this is, yeah, these are the colonies. And this is, these are the ones, oh, Yeah, they do a lot of this stuff on these old Russian trailers, with tires that aren't there anymore. And some of the easiest drone collecting we ever had was when these colonies were kicking the poor hapless drones out. You could just go collect handfuls of them. It was really sad in a way. Okay, and anyway, there's the bee there. They're pretty dark. To that question about, oh, I saw the queen there. Anyway, to the question about darkness, almost all of the mountain bees, the Carniolans, the Caucasians, Pomonella from the Tian Shan Mountains, and Monticola from the mountains of East Africa are all dark. So it may have something to do with this solar gain thing, you know, I mean, bumblebees are kind of like that too, they can heat up. And anyway, I don't know that we need to go through the rest of the slides, but thank you very much. I'm sorry that we didn't have slides.